Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at something that both of my subscribers have been eagerly awaiting, and that's picking a main. So with that, let's jump right into it. It used to be that picking a main had a lot of considerations. What's going to be easy to level? What's going to have a good professions to feed into it to make leveling easier and help the guild, and ultimately, what role do I want to play in a raid or dungeon? Now, a lot of these considerations are no longer considerations. Professions don't matter. You can start a new profession in Battle for Azeroth, and you won't have to worry about leveling it up to make stuff or gather stuff that is current thanks to the big changes to professions. So as for roles, I love tanking and healing, but my guild has pretty much told me that healing and tanking roles are full, and they need me as DPS. So that kind of solved itself. Now, we have tanking and healing off specs. Having a tanking and healing off spec is definitely something that could be helpful in the leveling process, because with a tanking or healing off spec, you can gear up faster and not have to wait around for queues when running dungeons. But ultimately, it's going to cause you so much insanity, because looking for a dungeon groups are so awful that it's more than enough to deter me. So even that is not going to be as much of a factor anymore. So now it's just a matter of finding out what class I want to play. So I know that I'm going to need to play a class that has DPS to it, so that pretty much narrows it down to every class in the game. So I think this will be a lot easier process for me and for anyone who's looking at my process and wanting to duplicate it, to eliminate classes that you know you're not going to want to play. So that's where I'm going to start. Well, if you've watched my tanking or healing comparison videos, and they are linked in the description down below, you'll know that I'm not a fan of Druid, tanking, or healing. This is enough for me to eliminate them off the list right from the start. This is not to say that they are bad tanks or bad heals. They can do both of those roles perfectly fine. I'm just saying I know from my personal preference that those are not classes that I like to tank and heal with. I don't like that style of play. That's not to say that they might not be right for someone else who does enjoy that style of play. So the next class I can say is an easy scratch is the Rogue. Outlaw was pretty fun and felt like damage was pretty solid, but the other Rogue specs just didn't feel as good. Assassination felt like it was too slow for my taste, and Subtlety seemed a bit clunky. I really liked Subtlety at the start of Legion, but it's gone downhill since then. I didn't have a really good flow in my BFA testing. The next class to eliminate is going to be a little bit more difficult decisions. And we'll start off right now with the Mage. If you saw my Fire Mage video, again, we'll link it down in the description below, you'd know that I was pretty excited about the spec. Huge crits, fluid gameplay made it way better than Combat Rogue, but the shortcomings of the other specs were not enough to keep it as a contender. Frost felt like Frost always has felt, good but not great. I'm not really even... To be perfectly honest, I'm not big on casters. I've never been real big on casters. And Arcane really just was not my cup of tea. I'm not a fan of the gameplay. When I want to burst, I want to use cooldowns and big nukes and not just spam one button for higher damage and more mana usage. So I didn't really like that style of play. The next class to not make the cut is the Warrior. I thought I might end up playing Warrior because Protection was so fun, but then it all got changed and mostly reverted to the way it was in Legion. Arms is another class or spec that felt kind of slow when I tested it. Fury's not awful, but it's not that great either. It doesn't feel like there are many options to play style through talents. I'm not going to say that it feels cookie cutter, but just to me, it didn't feel like I didn't feel like there were many options, and the different builds pretty much seem to play the same way. Even though they aren't bad, it's just not enough to keep the Warrior in contention. So the further down the list I go, the more difficult it is to decide against a class. This was definitely the case with the Shaman. The breakup with the Shaman is definitely a case of it's not you, it's me. All of the specs play pretty well, but I just didn't like them enough to say I could stick with them for the expansion. I will definitely come back to the Shaman sometime later down the line, though. The next class off the list is the Priest. I liked Holy a lot for a healer, and it definitely felt very powerful. Discipline was a good change of pace for healing and was pretty fun in my testing. Shadow, though, did not feel good. No matter the build or the rotation, I felt like I couldn't crank out DPS to the fullest potential of the spec. If that wasn't bad enough, Shadow definitely felt like the most squishy of the specs. So despite the two healing specs I enjoy, I have to pass on Priest because healing is not going to be my focus. This next one was a tough one because out of all the classes with a healing spec, I think this one was the most fun for straight healing. The class I'm referring to is the Monk. I also enjoyed the Brewmaster, though it wasn't my favorite tank. But Windwalker just didn't do it for me. The rotation just felt like finding a different button to press every time, and without any big crits or build up type of burst, it just didn't do it for me. Also, it felt like I took a lot more damage than I would expect from a leather wearer. It really pains me to say this next class won't be my main because this class was my original main. Of course, I'm referring to the Paladin. I could definitely see myself going nuclear as a Shakadan in a raid or a Mythic Plus with a guild group. I could also see myself in the role of an off tank for raiding as a prop pally, but I just can't see myself doing any of those things as Rhett. Rhett has so little AoE, and I have to slow myself down to avoid being stuck in a situation where I have nothing to press. I do like some of the changes, like bringing back Hammer of Wrath, but I think my Paladin is going to be on the bench for a while when Battle for Azeroth starts. Just as the Monk is a tough class to scratch because of how much I enjoyed the healing spec, the Demon Hunter is equally difficult to scratch because of how much I enjoyed their tanking spec. The biggest problem with Havoc Demon Hunters is this is the only DPS spec for the class. I have never liked Havoc, but I really decided to give it a good go because of how much I like Vengeance. It just seems like there's too many abilities, and it doesn't feel very powerful. The final three classes left are probably going to be the classes that I work on close in time together. The last class I list will be my main, though. So the spec that I probably enjoyed more than any others in my testing was the Survival Hunter. This is what I wished Survival Hunter was like during Legion. I love how there are different builds for giving your hunter like a different flavor if you want it. That being said, as much as I love the survival changes, and just a quick note here, they're bringing back Carve, so it just got even better. But yeah, like I was saying, as much as I love survival changes, I didn't love the marksman changes. Marksman definitely feels more powerful, and it is, as a whole, a lot more mobile, but the rotation's too slow and methodical. I don't enjoy it, and I feel like it is not going to have good survivability, no pun intended, for leveling up or doing world quests, but Marksman will definitely shine in a raid environment. Beast Mastery seems like it got some quality of life changes that made it a little better, but Beast Mastery is also probably the easiest spec to play in all of WoW. It's got a very easy rotation, and you have a pet to tank for you. Beast Mastery is an easy spec to level with and do things in the world. That being said, I like things to be a little bit more challenging and more engaging, which is why I prefer Survival. But if Survival gets nerfed into the ground, I could see myself doing Beast Mastery and maybe even Marksman if I'm in a raid and they need some more ranged. So the runner-up in the decision of which class to main is going to be the Death Knight. This was a bit of a surprise to me as I mainly only played my Death Knight as Blood. I had all but written off DK after a rather I'm going to get that word. Lackluster testing in Blood, but I figured I'd give the DPS specs a go just to be thorough, and boy was I glad I did. I really liked Unholy. Unholy is a spec in WoW that I played the least in the 12 plus years that I have been playing. I have to say I was pleasantly surprised. It felt very good, and that is coming from someone who's a definite novice at the spec. I think the more I play it and get used to it, the better I'll be. Frost was another spec that I hadn't really touched all that much in a while, but I like the changes made to it. The spec seems simpler and it has a good flow. Now, I don't know that I like it as much as Unholy, but if Unholy got nerfed to Infinity and beyond, I definitely wouldn't mind playing Frost. So, on my first passive testing, I wasn't really impressed with Blood. It didn't have the mobility or the on-demand healing like the Demon Hunter had. That being said, it does have good AoE DPS, which means it will have better control in a dungeon or raid situation with loads of ads, especially given all the issues with tank threat and yeah, all that big bag of worms. But that's probably a video for another day. I do think it all has good survivability cooldowns, and at best, it's a decent tanking spec. At worst, it's a serviceable tanking spec. So either way, the class has enough going for it to be my number one alt. So if you've done the math, you'll know that the only class left is the Warlock. Now, after all the changes I saw in the last beta build, and by last beta build, I mean probably the one before last because this video is taking me forever to make, but in that last build, there was a lot of changes, and I was not happy with the way things looked on the surface. I was ready to just say, no thanks to the Warlock. And in fact, I was actually so upset with the way the changes looked, and I was making a video on how Blizzard killing the thing I love about locks gets me so triggered. And while I was doing my testing, in the process of making that video, those changes kind of sort of started to make sense, and they actually kind of worked pretty great. So, just like with survival being everything I wanted it to be in Legions, that's pretty much the same story with the Demonology Warlock. And I'm going to say this is going to be my main spec. Demonology is just plain fun. I think even if they nerf it and squish the numbers, I'm still going to play it because of how fun it is. Having an army of demons to command against your enemies without them just being like a visual dot that you empower and spam Shadow Bolt is the best change of Battle for Azeroth. Plus, the spell animations are amazing. Speaking of spell animations, I couldn't just leave out how awesome looking the new Chaos Bolt animation is for Destruction. The tweaked Rain of Fire is also a nice touch. While Destruction is probably my least favorite spec, it definitely has some good synergy in the talents to do some serious bursts, which I really enjoyed in the testing. Affliction is the spec that I had the issues with involving changes. They they moved talents around. They switched some things up. They made it was a very different from when I originally did my testing in my first video, which I'm probably going to link in the description too. But anyway, after I discovered that Affliction had its own spec specific demon, which if you've seen any more videos or updates on the beta, you'll know that pretty much every Warlock spec has its own spec specific demon. Affliction has the Dark Glare, Destruction has the Infernal, and Demonology has the Tyrant. So once I discovered this, and I discovered that the Affliction's spec specific demon for a cooldown, basically, how it has an amazing interplay with the flavor of the spec in general. Yeah, once I got that and I started to see how it played, I was back on the Warlock train. Affliction has a fun rotation that revolves around maintaining dots and then big bursty crits, at least in the build I run. If you haven't guessed by now, I love big crits. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video and that seeing my thought process was helpful to you. If you did like the video, leave a like and tell me what class you plan to main and why. Always got to know the why. The why is what I live for. But if you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button like you'd love to hit a Blizzard developer who took away your favorite ability. Before I end this video, I just want to give a quick shout out to some YouTubers who I've come across in recent days who I think are putting out some pretty exceptional content, but could definitely use some more love from the community. Those YouTubers are Mr. Christopher, Evo Wow, and Am Shady. I've linked their channels in the description below. Go give their videos a watch, give them a like, give them a subscribe. They're doing some pretty good stuff, and they deserve your subscriptions, likes, etc. So with that, I'll see you next time.